The morning sky over New Terra burned, with colors that didn't belong there. Orange and red streak across the blue atmosphere as orbital defense platforms exploded one by one. Sarah Chen stood in her kitchen, coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips, watching through her window. As death fell from the stars, the first kinetic strike hit the northern continent. 3 seconds later, the shock wave shattered her windows. The mug fell from her hands. She never heard it break, because the sound of 40,000 people dying all at once was much, much louder. The Krexith Empire had come to New Terra without warning, without diplomacy, without mercy. Their insectoid warships hung in orbit like metal wasps, and they stung with precision. Agricultural centers, water treatment facilities, schools, hospitals. They weren't trying to conquer, they were trying to erase. On Earth 500 light-years away, Admiral Sarah Okonkwo watched the reports flood in. Her dark eyes reflected the light from dozens of screens, each one showing another tragedy. Her jaw tightened. Her hands remained steady on the desk. She had commanded Earth's fleet for 12 years. She had kept the peace. She had believed that humanity's violent past was truly past. Admire the Krexith are broadcasting. Her communications officer said. Lieutenant Park's voice shook slightly. He was young. He had never seen war. Put it through. The screen filled with the segmented face of war sovereigns. His mandibles clicked together in what the translation software rendered as satisfaction. Humans of Earth Command, your colony, world New Terra, has been sterilized. This is necessary. Your species spreads too quickly, consumes too readily. You are an infestation species. We have acted to protect the galaxy's resources. Okonkwo said nothing. She simply stared. Thexgar continued. We offer you terms. Cease all expansion beyond your current territories. Submit to Kazith oversight, or we will continue cleansing operations. The transmission ended. Command center fell silent. 40 officers waited for their admiral to speak. Outside the viewport, Earth rotated peacefully below them. Billions of humans went about their lives unaware that everything had just changed. Get me Ambassador Chen Wei, Okonkwo said quietly, and someone wake up the council. Ambassador Chen Wei had spent 30 years building bridges between humanity and the Galactic Concordant. The coalition of 6 alien species had welcomed humans cautiously, impressed by their technology but wary of their rapid expansion. Chen had convinced them that humanity had left its violent nature behind, that the wars and weapons of old Earth were museum pieces, remnants of a darker age. Now he sat in the Concorded Assembly Hall, watching those carefully built bridges burn. The Krexith Empire is not part of our conquered, the Vexani representative said. Her crystalline form refracted the chamber's light into rainbow patterns. We cannot intervene in conflicts between outside parties. 40,000 civilians, Chen said. His voice was hollow. They murdered 40,000 civilians in 3 hours. We understand your grief, the Telmoran ambassador replied. His forearms gestured sympathetically. But the Krexith are a military power. They have not violated concorded space. We must maintain neutrality. Chen stood. Then I'm requesting an emergency session with the historical archives, specifically the human submission files. The assembled aliens exchanged glances. The Vexani's light pattern shifted to confused colors. Ambassador, those files were sealed as part of your Induction agreement, opening them would. Require I'm unsealing them, chin. Interrupted because you need to. Understand what happens next, you need. To understand what humanity is choosing. Not to do, 3 days past. The Kreseth. Attacked 2 more settlements, 6,000. More dead, Earth Command said nothing. The silence stretched across human space. Like a held breath, on the 4th day. Every screen in the Concorded Assembly Hall activated simultaneously. Admiral Okonkwo's face appeared behind her. Through the viewport Earth hung, serene and blue. This message is for War Sovereign of the Krexith Empire, she said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. You attacked our civilians. You murdered our children. You did this without provocation, without warning, without honor. She paused somewhere on the edge of human space. Thixgar was watching. The Conquered was watching. The galaxy was watching since you started the battle. Okonkwo continued. We'll end it properly. The transmission cut in the Concorded Assembly. The Vexani representative opened the human historical files. The first document was titled A Brief History of Human Warfare, 3000 BCE CE to 2650 CA. She read for 3 minutes before her crystalline structure began vibrating with what could only be described as horror. The Talmorian ambassador read over her shoulder. His forearms fell limp. World War I. World War II. Nuclear weapons mutually assured destruction. The water wars. The corporate conflicts. 6,000 years of humans killing humans with increasing efficiency. Weapons designed not just to defeat enemies, but to make the very idea of war so terrible that no one would dare start one. They survived this, the Vexani whispered. And GT, they did this to themselves and survived. And GT, the files continued. Peace treaties. The Unified Earth Government. The decision to mothball the war machines. The museum fleet. Hundreds of warships kept in perfect condition, floating in silent orbit around Earth's moon. Reminders of what humanity had been. Warnings of what they could become again. We need to contact the Krexith. The Talmorian said they don't understand what they've done, but it was too late. Across human space, the museum fleet was already waking up. The museum fleet had orbited Luna for 217 years, sleek destroyers from the corporate wars, massive carriers from the unification campaign, dreadnoughts that had once leveled cities from orbit. They floated in perfect formation, their hulls polished and maintained, their weapon systems checked monthly, museums, memorials, reminders. Now they were waking up. Thexgar watched the human fleet movements with amusement. His tactical officers had identified 73 warships moving into formation near the human home system, ancient vessels. According to their databases, ships that were 300 years old or more. They send us antiques. He clicked to his bridge crew. The humans are even weaker than we calculated. His intelligence officer, a younger Krexith named Vixel, studied the sensor data more carefully. War Sovereign, these ships have modern power signatures. Their engines have been updated. Cosmetic improvements. Thexar dismissed. The ship's bones do not change. These are relics. We will sweep them aside like dust. What Thixgar didn't understand, what no species in the galaxy understood, was that humans were very good at learning from their mistakes. The museum fleet hulls might be old, but everything inside was cutting edge, quantum processors, plasma, weapons, shield systems that bent light. Itself, the ships were like ancient swords reforged with molecular blades. More importantly, they carried something far more dangerous than advanced technology. They carried human warfare. Doctrine. Ambassador Chen Wei stood in the Concorded Assembly Hall, surrounded by holographic displays showing human military history. The alien representatives sat in uncomfortable silence as image after image scrolled past. Nuclear explosions, chemical weapons, trenches filled with bodies. You asked us to seal these records, Chen said quietly. You said it was too disturbing, too violent. You couldn't believe a species could do such things to itself and survive. The Vexani representative's crystalline form pulsed with agitated colors. We meant no offense, Ambassador. It's simply that such brutality is unknown in Concorded history. We evolved past physical conflict before we developed extinction level weapons. We didn't, Chen said. We developed the weapons first. We learned restraint by nearly destroying ourselves twice. He pulled up another file. Do you know what mutually assured destruction means? The Telmorian ambassador shook his head. It means we built weapons so terrible that using them would guarantee our own death. So we built more and more until we had enough to end all life on Earth 100 times over. We lived with that reality for 150 years. Chen's hands shook as he manipulated the display. Do you know what we call a battle where 10% of your forces die? In Concordat warfare, that's considered a catastrophic loss, something that would trigger immediate surrender. Negotiations. Yes, the Vexani said, such casualties are unthinkable. We call it Tuesday, Chen said bitterly. In the Battle of Stalingrad, over 2 million people died. In the Siege of Baghdad, we lost 500,000 in 6 weeks. The water wars killed 90 million over 8 years. We kept fighting. The assembly fell silent. The Krexith don't know what they've started, Chen continued. They think they're fighting another Concorded species. They think destroying our colonies will make us surrender. They're wrong. On the edge of human space, the museum fleet arrived at Rally Point. Vengeance. Admiral Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the UES Indomitable, a carrier that had seen service in the last war. Humanity had fought against itself. That had been 200 years ago. The ship remembered. All ships reporting ready. Admiral, her tactical officer reported 73 capital ships, 214 support craft, and the drone swarms. Okonkwo nodded. The Krexith killed 40,000 of ours. I want proportional targeting solutions. Not one person more than they killed. We're not monsters. Her officers exchanged glances. They had trained for this their whole lives, studying battles that happened centuries ago. They knew the doctrine. They knew the tactics. They knew that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't its technology. It was its willingness to accept losses that would break any other species. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Kazith fleet. Communications reported War Sovereign Thixgar wants to negotiate. Put him through. Thexar's segmented face appeared on screen. His mandibles were still, his compound eyes unreadable. Human Admiral, we have reconsidered our position. We are willing to offer compensation for new Terra resources territory. We can reach an agreement. Akono studied him for a long moment. You attack civilians, a regrettable necessity of war. We don't consider it necessary. Akono said. We consider it a war crime. You started this battle, war sovereign. We're going to end it properly. That means you face justice. You cannot defeat the Krexith Empire. We have 900 warships. We know. Akono said calmly. We've already calculated acceptable loss ratios. You should surrender now. The transmission cut. Thixkar stared at the blank screen. Acceptable loss ratios. What does that mean? His intelligence officer Vixel pulled up the human historical files that the Concorded had finally shared with them. His mandibles clicked rapidly in distress. War sovereign, I think it means they've already accepted that some of their ships will die. They've planned for it. Planned for it? What species plans to lose ships? Humans, Vixel said quietly. In the Battle of Midway, they sent torpedo bombers against the enemy, knowing most wouldn't return. In the Normandy invasion, they accepted 10,000 casualties to establish a beachhead. War sovereign, they don't fight like us. They don't fight like anyone. Thexar's certainty wavered for the first time. He looked at his fleet roster. 900 warships, the pride of the Krexith Empire, ships that had conquered 6 systems without significant losses. The humans had 73 ancient vessels and were talking about acceptable losses. Prepare for battle. Thixkar ordered all ships to defensive formation. If they want to die on our guns, we'll accommodate them. But even as he gave the order, Thexar felt something he hadn't experienced in his 30 years of military service, a cold feeling in his thorax. The files on human warfare still glowed on his screen. For the first time in his life, war sovereign Thixar understood fear. The Frontier Nebula was beautiful. Clouds of purple and gold gas stretched across light years, lit from within by newborn stars. It was the kind of place that made people remember how vast and wonderful the universe was. It was about to become a graveyard. The Krexith fleet held formation at the nebula's edge. 900 warships arranged in perfect defensive spheres, their weapons charged and ready. War sovereigns had chosen the position carefully. The nebula's radiation would interfere with sensors. The gas clouds would provide cover. His ships could fall back through the clouds if needed, forcing any attacker to follow them into the interference. He had every tactical advantage. He had no idea that humans had been fighting in worse conditions for thousands of years. Admiral Okonkwo stood on the Indomitable's bridge, studying the tactical display. 73 ships against 900. The numbers didn't favor humanity. They never had. Launch the drone swarms, she ordered quietly. From every human ship, hatches opened. What emerged looked like clouds of metallic insects, thousands upon thousands of them. They were small, each one no bigger than a human fist. They moved in patterns that seemed almost organic, flowing and shifting. Like schools of fish. The Krexith Point defense systems opened fire immediately. Plasma bursts and particle beams cut through the swarms, destroying hundreds. But there were thousands more, and unlike living pilots, the drones didn't care about dying. Conventional tactics, Thixkar observed from his flagship. Overwhelming numbers to saturate our defenses. Predictable. Then the drones started exploding, not because they were hit, because they chose to. Each drone was a small fusion device, and they detonated in carefully choreographed waves. The explosions created walls of Plasma that the Krexith sensors couldn't penetrate. Within seconds, the entire battlefield was blind, sensors down. His tactical officer reported, the radiation is interfering with everything. Switch to backup systems, maintain formation. But the humans weren't maintaining formation. The museum fleet had split into small groups, each one moving through the plasma clouds with practiced precision. They had fought in worse nuclear winter, ash clouds from burning cities, smoke so thick you couldn't see your own hand. They remembered how to fight blind. The first Krexith destroyer died without ever seeing what killed it. A railgun round traveling at relativistic speeds punched through its shields and hull like they were paper. The ship broke apart, its reactor detonating in a flash of blue light. Then another died and another. The humans were hunting in the clouds using sensors the Krexith didn't even know existed. Gravitational wave detectors, neutrino trackers, technology developed during humanity's darkest wars when the enemy could be anywhere and everywhere. Return fire. Thexar ordered all ships. Return fire. The Krexith fleet opened up blindly, pumping energy weapons into the plasma clouds. Some shots hit human shields, a few penetrated the destroyer. UES Relentless took a direct hit to its engine section. The ship died quickly. On the Indomitable, the tactical officer reported the loss. Relentless is gone. Admiral All Hands, Akono's expression didn't change. Noted, continue the attack pattern. 400 crew members had just died. The Admiral had noted it and moved on. This was the part that made other species think humans were cold. They weren't cold, they were focused. They had learned long ago that stopping to mourn in the middle of a battle got more people killed. There would be time for grief later. For now there was only the mission. The Krexith fleet was in chaos. They couldn't see their enemy. They couldn't coordinate their fire. Ships were dying one by one, picked off by an invisible hunter that struck and vanished before they could respond. Bixtel, the intelligence officer, studied the attack patterns on his tactical display. Even through the interference, he could see the truth. War Sovereign, they're not trying to win, they're trying to make us pay. What? Look at the casualty ratio. They've destroyed 43 of our ships. That's approximately 40,000 Kzith. Personnel, the same number they lost on New Terra. The car's mandibles clicked. In confusion, they're counting deaths in the middle of a battle, yes, and war. Sovereign, if I'm correct, they're about to stop. As if on cue, the human fleet emerged from the plasma clouds, all 71 remaining ships arranged in perfect formation. Admiral Okonkwo's face appeared on every Krexith screen simultaneously. War Sovereign Thexar, she said, we have destroyed 43 of your ships. Approximately 40,000 of your people have died. This is proportional response. Same number you killed on New Terra. She paused. Withdraw your forces now. Go home, face justice for what you've done. This is your only warning. Thexar stared at the human admiral. She was giving him a chance to surrender after demonstrating that she could tear his fleet apart ship by ship. She was offering mercy, pride weared with survival in his mind. The Krexith Empire did not surrender. The Krexith Empire did not retreat. The Krexith Empire was the strongest military power outside the Concorded. But these humans had just destroyed 5% of his fleet while barely seeing them. No, Dexar said, his voice was hard. You want war, you'll have War all ships full assault, kill them. All. And GT on the Indomitable. Okonkwo closed her eyes for just a moment. She had hoped the Krexith would take the offer. She had genuinely hoped they would choose peace. Admiral, her tactical officer, asked quietly. Okonkwo opened her eyes. They were hard now, cold. Unleash everything, all weapons free. Show them what we've been holding back. The human ships changed. Panels opened along their halls, revealing weapon systems that hadn't been there before. Missiles launched, but these weren't normal missiles. They were AI-driven learning systems that adapted to enemy countermeasures in real time. Drones deployed, but these were different from the suicide swarms. These were hunter killers armed with quantum disruption warheads. And then the humans did something that made the watching concorded observers question reality itself. They started singing over every communication channel. Human voices rose in harmony. Old war songs, battle hymns, songs that had been sung on battlefields for thousands of years. The translations didn't matter, the emotion did. Krexith fleet charged forward, and the humans met them head-on. No more surgical strikes, no more careful proportionality. This was total war, the kind that humanity had spent 2 centuries trying to forget, the kind they had never truly forgotten at all. Ships burned, reactors exploded, shields failed, and hulls ruptured. The beautiful nebula filled with debris and bodies. Krexith fought with desperate courage. The humans fought with centuries of practice. When the plasma finally cleared, 368 Krexith ships were destroyed or disabled. The human fleet had lost 29 vessels, and Admiral Okonkwo broadcast one final message to the survivors: run home, war sovereign. Tell your empire what you learned here today. Tell them what happens when you murder human children. Tell them we showed restraint. Her eyes were hollow, haunted, because next time we won't. The Krexiath home world of Krex Prime was a fortress. After the disaster at the Frontier Nebula, War Sovereign Thixar had retreated with his surviving ships and fortified his position. Orbital defense platforms ringed the planet like a crown of thorns. Ground-based weapons covered every approach. Shield generators capable of protecting entire cities hummed with power. And between the defenses and the fleet, Thixar had positioned his civilians. Refugee ships filled with Krexith. Families floated in orbital patterns, deliberately placed where any attacking force would have to go through them. Civilian stations were integrated into the military infrastructure. Schools and hospitals were built next to ammunition depots and command centers. It was a hostage situation on a planetary scale. They won't attack, Dexar said, studying the tactical displays. His remaining war council had gathered in the underground command center deep beneath the capital city. The humans showed mercy at the nebula. They stopped killing when they reached proportional numbers. They value civilian life. It makes them weak. Vikal, his intelligence officer, was less certain. War Sovereign, the human historical file suggests otherwise. In their ancient wars, they faced similar situations many times. The results were not always merciful. Those were humans fighting humans. Thixar countered. Now they fight us, they will hesitate, and hesitation will be their defeat. 3 days later, the human fleet arrived. 42 ships. That's all that remained of the museum fleet after the battle at the Frontier Nebula, they took up position beyond the orbital defense range and simply waited. Hours passed, then days. The Galactic Concord had sent desperate messages to Admiral Okonkwo. The Vexani representative's crystalline form practically vibrated with distress on the communication screen. Admiral, you cannot assault that planet. The civilian casualties would be unthinkable. If you attack, you'll be no better than the Krexith. Okonkwo looked tired. She had barely slept since New Terra fell. I'm aware of the situation. Then you must stand down. This conflict has already cost too many lives. Declare victory and withdraw. The Concordant will mediate a peace agreement. Will you arrest Thier? Akono asked quietly. Will you try him for war crimes? Will you ensure he never commands a fleet again? The Vexani's lights flickered uncertainly. We would need to negotiate terms. The Krexith Empire is sovereign. We cannot simply. That's what I thought. Okonkwo interrupted. He hides behind civilians because he knows it protects him, not from us, from justice. She cut the transmission on Krax Prime. Thexar watched the human fleet and felt confidence growing. A week passed, 2 weeks. The humans just sat there doing nothing. His people began to believe they had won. The mighty human fleet, the terror that had destroyed half his armada, was paralyzed by conscience. Then Thexar made his final mistake. He broadcast a message across all frequencies aimed at the human fleet and the watching galaxy. His image appeared on every screen, mandibles clicking in what translated as contempt. Humans of Earth, you came for revenge. You claimed you would end this battle properly, but you cannot, can you? You cannot win without becoming the monsters you claim to have left behind. Your mercy is your weakness. Your conscience is your chain. He gestured with his segmented limbs at the civilian ships floating around him. These are my people, my children, my future. To reach me, you must kill them, and you cannot do it, can you? You proved that at the nebula when you stopped counting bodies. You proved it by sitting out here for 2 weeks doing nothing. Thexar leaned closer to the camera. So I offer you terms. Leave our space, never return, and perhaps I will show mercy to your remaining colonies. Perhaps. The transmission ended. On the Indomitable, Admiral Okonkwo sat in her command chair and finally allowed herself to smile. It was not a kind expression. Captain, is Operation Thunderhead ready? Her tactical officer nodded. Every ship reports ready. Admiral, all synchronized. We've had 2 weeks to map every military installation on the planet and in orbit. Margin of error is 3%. And the collateral damage projections minimal. Admiral, the targeting solutions are as precise as we can make them. Okonkwo stood. Then let's teach the war sovereign what properly means. Launch Operation Thunderhead. What happened next will be studied in militarisms for centuries. The human fleet didn't charge the defenses. They didn't fire their main weapons. Instead, each ship launched a single small object. 42 objects, each one no bigger than a shuttlecraft streaking toward Krax Prime. The Krexith defense systems opened fire. Plasma weapons and particle beams converged on the small targets. The first few were destroyed easily. Then the objects started adapting. They were AI-driven infiltration drones, equipped with technology that the humans had recovered from a dozen alien species and improved upon. They learned from Each defensive attack, they shifted frequencies to match shield harmonics. They used gravitational lensing to bend space around themselves, and they slipped through the Craigslist defenses like water through a sieve. Thea watched in horror as the defense platforms went dark one by one, not destroyed, disabled. The human drones were hacking into Kexith computer systems using quantum processing power that operated faster than Kexith security could respond. Within an hour, every orbital defense was offline. The civilian ships remained untouched. How? Vexar whispered. How are they doing this? Vixel pulled up the human historical files with trembling limbs. War sovereign in their year 2087. Humans fought the AI wars. Machines they had built turned against them. They learned to fight enemies that thought faster than they did. They learned to fight enemies that could hack any system, and they won. Vixel continued quietly. They always win. That's what the files say. Humans lose battles. They lose millions of their own people, but they never stop. They never surrender. They just keep coming until they achieve their objective. The ground-based defenses fell. Next, human cyber warfare systems overwhelmed Kexith computers like a tidal wave. Weapons systems locked out. Shield generator shut down. Command and control networks went dark. And then Admiral Akinquo broadcast one more message. Her face appeared on every screen on Craig's Prime. She looked directly at the car, and her eyes were cold as vacuum. War sovereign, we've disabled your military infrastructure. Your weapons are offline. Your defenses are gone. We did this without harming a single civilian because we could. Because we're not monsters. We're not. She leaned forward. Now you have a choice. Surrender yourself for trial. Face justice for the 40,000 civilians you murdered, or we'll come down there and get you. Your people won't be harmed, but you will answer for what you've done. Vexar looked around his command center. His officers stared at their dead consoles. Outside, his people were unharmed, but his military was broken. The humans had done the impossible. They had won without becoming the villains. We could have turned your planet into glass from orbit. Akono and LT Unk and GT's voice continued. We have weapons that could sterilize Krex Prime in minutes. We chose not to use them because we learned from our mistakes. Now you're going to learn from yours. Dexar's mandibles stopped moving. For the first time in his life, he truly understood what he had done. He had attacked a species that had nearly destroyed itself. Restraint. Species that knew every dark path, every terrible choice, every monstrous option, and had deliberately chosen to be better. Human Marines landed at the capital. 3 hours later, they came prepared for resistance. They found none. Sekar waited for them in his command center. Alone, his weapons laid aside. As they placed him in restraints, he asked the human commander a question. Why did you show mercy? The Marine, a woman with scars on her face and eyes that had seen too much, smiled sadly. Because someone has to. The trial took place on neutral ground at the Galactic Concordance judicial station orbiting the star system called Haven. It was designed for exactly this purpose, a place where species could seek justice without fear of military intervention. The courtroom was vast, with space for representatives from every member species and observers from dozens more. War Sovereign's car stood in the defendant's chamber. His segmented body seeming smaller somehow. Without his military uniform, he was dressed in simple gray cloth. His mandibles were still, his compound eyes fixed on the judges. The evidence was presented over 3 days. Recordings from New Terra showed the orbital bombardments, the deliberate targeting of civilian infrastructure, the lack of warning. Kazith military communications were played, including Thekar's orders to continue attacks even after the colony had signaled surrender. Ambassador Chen Wei testified for the prosecution. His voice was steady, but his hands shook as he described finding the casualty lists: 40,000 names, 40,000 families destroyed. On the 3rd day, Admiral Okonkwo took the stand. She was asked why humanity had stopped after destroying 43 Krexith ships at the Frontier Nebula. Proportional response. She said simply, "He killed 40,000 of ours. We killed 40,000 of his." Justice, not vengeance. The Vixani judges' crystalline form shifted to curious colors. But Admiral, you could have destroyed his entire fleet at that moment. Your tactical advantage was absolute. Why give him the opportunity to retreat? Akona was silent for a long moment. Because we remember what it's like to go too far. We remember what happens when you stop seeing the enemy as people. We nearly destroyed ourselves. Learning that lesson, I won't forget it. Even for revenge. The verdict came on the 4th day, guilty on all counts. War crimes against civilians, crimes against sentient life, unlawful warfare. Thexar was sentenced to life imprisonment. His military rank was stripped. His name would be recorded in concorded history as a warning. But that wasn't the end of the story. The Krexith Empire was in chaos. Their military was shattered, their leadership disgraced. Other predatory species began circling, sensing weakness. Within weeks, 3 neighboring systems had launched raids on Krexith territory. The conquered called for sanctions. They issued strongly worded statements. They did what peaceful species always did when faced with aggression. They talked while people died. On Earth, the unified government held an emergency session. The debate lasted 6 hours. Half the representatives argued that the Krexith deserved whatever happened to them. They had started the war. They had murdered civilians. Let them face the consequences. The other half argued something different. Admiral Okonkwo addressed the government from the indomitable. We didn't fight this war to become conquerors. We fought it to prove that mercy is stronger than cruelty. If we let the Krexith Empire fall, if we let their civilians die because we're angry at their leaders, then we become what Thexar said we were: monsters hiding behind conscience. The vote was close, but humanity decided. The museum fleet returned to Kexith space, not as conquerors, as guardians. Human warships took up defensive positions around Kazith worlds. When raiders attacked, they found themselves facing the same force that had shattered the Krexith military. The attack stopped within a month. On the ground, human engineers and Krexith workers rebuilt together. Hospitals were repaired. Infrastructure was restored. Human medical teams treated Krexith wounded. Human teachers helped educate Krexith children about what had happened and why it must never happen again. It wasn't easy. Many Krexith resented the help. They saw it as occupation, not assistance. Many humans struggled with helping the species that had killed their friends and family. But slowly, Carefully something changed. Ambassador. Chen Wei established the new Terra Accords, a treaty that redefined the rules of war in concorded space. Any attack on civilians would trigger immediate intervention by all signatories. War crimes would be prosecuted by an independent judiciary, and most importantly, defeated enemies would be helped to rebuild, not left to collapse. We learned this the hard way, Chen told the Concorded Assembly. After our Second World War, we helped our enemies rebuild. We didn't grind them into the dirt, we lifted them up, and those former enemies became our closest allies. That's the lesson we're trying to share. The treaty was signed by every concorded species, even the Krexith now, under new leadership, added their signature. The galaxy had learned something about humanity. They weren't the peaceful newcomers everyone had thought. They weren't the naive idealists playing at civilization. They were something far more complex and far more dangerous. They were a species that had walked through the fire of their own worst nature and come out the other side, a species that knew every dark path and chose to walk a different one, a species that could be absolutely brutal in war and absolutely merciful. Victory. Admiral Okonkwo retired 6 months after the war ended. She was 53 years old and looked 70. The war had aged her in ways that time alone could not. She returned to Earth and spent her days at the memorial gardens where the names of every human who had died in the conflict were carved in stone. 12,000 names, 12,000 people who had gone to war so that others wouldn't have to. She visited every week, reading the names, remembering the faces. Some nights she dreamed about the battle at the front, Nebula about the ships that had died on her orders, about the calculations she had made deciding which lives were worth trading for victory. Some nights she couldn't sleep at all. The museum fleet returned to orbit around Luna, returning to their silent watch, but one ship remained at Craig's Prime, the UES. Indomitable. Admiral Okonkwo's flagship was gifted to the Krexith people as a permanent reminder. They renamed it the Testament. It orbited their home world, a massive warship with weapons that could level cities, now converted into a museum and school. Krexith children took field trips to walk its corridors, to see the tactical displays, to understand what had happened, and on the bridge, in a place of honor, they mounted a plaque with the message that had started everything. Since you started the battle, we'll end it properly. 50 years later, a young Krexith student named Tixon visited the Testament for his class project. He was studying human history, trying to understand the species that had defeated his people and then helped them rebuild. He found an old human veteran giving tour of the ship, a woman with gray hair and kind eyes. "Can I ask you something?" Tixon asked, his mandibles clicking nervously. "Of course, kid. Why did you help us after everything we did? After your people died, why did humans come back to protect us?" The old woman smiled sadly. She had been a young Marine during the war, part of the landing force that had arrested Thixar. Now she spent her retirement teaching young Krexith about the war their grandparents had started, because we remembered what it was like to be you. She said gently, "Humans almost destroyed ourselves learning restraint. We nearly wiped out our whole species because we couldn't stop fighting. We were you once. Aggressive, proud, certain we were. Right?" She gestured at the ship around them. "We built weapons that could end Worlds, we used them on each other. We did terrible things and we survived. Anyway, we learned, we changed, we became better, but it was hard, she continued. It took us centuries, wars, suffering, millions of deaths, and you know what helped? Someone showing us mercy when we didn't deserve it, someone choosing to see our potential instead of our past. Tixon's compound eyes reflected the lights of the bridge. So you did for us what someone did for you. Exactly, the old woman said. We weren't going to let you make the same mistakes we did, even if that meant saving you from yourselves. She led him to the viewport where Craig's Prime rotated peacefully below. Cities glowed with light, ships moved in peaceful orbital patterns. The planet was healing. That's what ending it properly means, she said. Not with extinction, not with vengeance, but with justice and mercy, with the hope that someday you'll do the same for someone else. Tixon stared at his home world, understanding beginning to dawn in his young mind. Did it work? Are we better? The old woman smiled. You're here, aren't you? Learning, asking questions, wanting to understand. That's better than your grandparents were. That's progress. She put a hand on his segmented shoulder. The circle continues, kid. We saved you. Someday you'll save someone else. That's how civilizations grow, not by conquering, by lifting each other up. As Tixon left the testament that day, he carried with him a lesson that would shape his life. He would grow up to become a diplomat, working to spread the principles of the New Terra Accords to other species. He would teach others what humanity had taught the Krexith. That mercy is not weakness, that restraint is not defeat, that the truest strength is choosing to be kind when you have every reason to be cruel. And somewhere on Earth in the memorial gardens, Admiral Sarah Okonkwo's name was carved alongside those who had fallen. She had died peacefully in her sleep at age 87, having spent the last decades of her life teaching others about the cost of war and the price of peace. The inscription beneath her name read simply, she ended it properly. The galaxy remembered and learned and tried to be better, because humanity had shown them